Hello, everyone, and welcome to Smart Estate Planning for Farm Families. I am Annessa Good, and I am FCC's Southern Alberta Ag Transition Specialist. This is an exciting new role for FCC, and we work with farm families in regards to pre-transition planning. Our goal is to help the farm family start the conversation, and then the family can work with their technical advisors, such as accountants and lawyers, to create their own transition plan. I am thrilled and honored to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Tom Deans. Dr. Deans is a best-selling author and award-winning speaker who is here to challenge us to think differently and ask the right questions when it comes to succession and estate planning for you and your farm business. Hello, Dr. Deans. Thank you for joining us here today. How are you?
Oh, fantastic. That's great to join you, and great. Wow, we've got a lot of ground to cover, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, this is a farming show, therefore I must ask about the weather. How is it down east?
Oh, you know what? We've had a string of hot weather, but no one's complaining. We've been really lucky, really lucky.
Perfect. Yeah, across the country, it's been quite a year so far, for sure. Alrighty, so before we get into the meat and potatoes of today's conversation, I see that our poll is showing a variety of different producers who have joined us today. Canadian agriculture is so diverse. It's pretty amazing. As you can see, a couple of the big ones are certainly cattle, dairy, grain. No big surprise there, but love the diversity. Okay, so for another quick poll, if you could please answer the question, and then we can look at the results as they come in. So our question is for the audience: do you have a written estate plan? The title of today's webinar is Smart Estate Plans for Farming Families. Dr. Deans, could you please give a brief overview of estate planning in Canada today in general? Are Canadians' estate plans in good shape? And to build on that, what are you seeing in the ag sector specifically?
Well, it's a great place to start today's conversation. And I wish I could start off with some extraordinary happy news, but the reality is estate plans are in pretty rough shape. We know right across the country, in every single region, from the West Coast to the East Coast and everything in between, including the North, we know that roughly over 50% of Canadian adults are missing the most important document in an estate plan. And of course, we know that's a will. And we know that if they don't have a will, they don't have a power of attorney. We know that they don't have a healthcare directive. So that 50 to 52% without a will, that represents roughly 12.5 million Canadians who are, quite frankly, in troubled waters. Because if there's no will, there is no estate plan. The provincial government where you live has a formula for dividing the estate, the farm, the canoe, the barbecue, according to that provincial formula. So they don't say, well, that was a really close-knit family, and we hear that mom and dad always wanted to talk about dividing the farm equally. That's not the way it works. Like, the government formula is the government formula. Whether you have a small farm, a medium-sized farm, a big farm, that formula applies universally. So I think a lot of people are really shocked to find out that verbal promises, for example, someone says, listen, I don't have a will, but you know what to do, right? You know what to do. You know what my wishes are. It doesn't work that way. You need a written document, and you really should get a written document prepared by a lawyer. I know there are a lot of estate planning will kits that you can get at Staples down the road for about $19. Well, that and a cup of coffee is worth about $19. Like, it is not the way to go. You really want to get professional advice from lawyers who have seen the good, the bad, the ugly, and can really guide farming families to have really well thought out, well crafted documents. So the reality is, the quick answer is, estate plans in Canada, not in great shape, okay? 12.5 million people without a will. But the 12.5 million people who do have a will, there's more bad news. Annessa, there's more bad news.
Oh,
80% of those wills, 80% of those wills are really badly outdated. For example, the executor who's been listed as the executor, their executor is dead. We often select executors who are older than us, and they pass away, and we forget to change our wills. So there's just a lot of people listening today, right now, who have wills but haven't really reviewed them in 5, 10, 25. There's some wills that are 40 years old, I guarantee it, that haven't been updated. Beneficiaries have died. There's been a material change in their assets, like their thinking has changed. Some people pull out their wills, they read it, and they go, oh my, what was I thinking? So a big part of the message today is it's not just important to have a will, but it's super important to review those documents, power of attorney, healthcare directive, and your will once a year. That's a great rule. Lots changes in a year. So that's a good starting point.
No, I couldn't agree more. The power of the outdated as well. And I find that really interesting that it mirrors our poll results so closely of approximately 70% not having a plan. So definitely a strong statistic. That is what we're here today to address and work on. So the next poll just builds on that. What is holding you back, or is your biggest challenge with your transition plans? So, Dr. Deans, in your experience then, what is preventing people from putting these important estate planning documents in place? What's the holdup?
I think the answer to that question is different depending kind of on ages, right? Young people go, I'm young. First of all, I'm not going to die till I'm really old. And I don't have a lot of money, or I don't have a lot of assets. So wills are just for really wealthy people. And then middle-aged people and older people will often say, well, I'm going to buy a new piece of equipment. And so I don't want to write a will right now, because as soon as I buy that new piece of equipment, everything's going to change, or I'm going to get a new loan, or I'm going to buy a new farm. So I'm just going to wait till everything is perfect before I actually spend the $500 or $1,000 it takes to get a really well-crafted will. So they just wait and they procrastinate. So that is a big problem for older people. And then third, there is a healthy dose of superstition. There's a lot of people who think if I write a will, if I sign a will, and certainly if I hold a will, I don't know if you know this, but they think they're going to die. I mean, it is really absurd. I mean, the reverse would be, if you have a will, you will live longer. That's equally absurd. So really part of my message today is, listen, when you have wills and when you have power of attorneys, right? And we can talk a little bit about that, coming up, the difference between those two things, and the healthcare directive. Really, my main message is that estate planning is not just about dying and dividing our stuff among our heirs and our community, our charities of choice. Estate planning is very much about the living. It's really about giving people that we love and trust the power to act in our best interests when we lose mental capacity, if we have an accident, if we bump our head getting off the tractor and go unconscious. We have given people the legal authority to write checks and continue the farming operation in our best interest, as if they are us. So estate planning is for the living. It's for the living, and great families, I think, that can overcome this fear of talking about aging and dying will really actually run really efficient and really smart farms.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so multifaceted, as you said, and looking at some of the poll answers that have come in, communication and family relationship seems to be the core, right? And not only are we trying to keep a sustainable business, but now we're looking also at, putting that actual pen to paper. And for sure, I think that's where one of the comments, don't know where to start. It's definitely why FCC created our roles, and we utilize and depend on you technical advisors. So definitely helping bridge that very scary step. So again, continuing further on that, I think very relevant to today is, I know that with the families I have been working with and speaking to recently, COVID-19 has really been an eye-opener to kickstart their estate planning priorities. We have been reminded we are not all invincible. Your message is unique because you make a connection between estate planning and later in life care. Can you please elaborate, especially considering COVID-19?
Oh, Annessa, I mean, that question is just so bang on. I mean, who would have thought 4 months ago that the world would come crashing down and that a global pandemic would take estate planning from priority 175 to one of the top 3 things that are keeping families awake at night, right? I mean, think of it. You've got young farmers who have never talked to their parents about how the farm's going to transition because they don't know how to start the conversation. And they're worried about their parents getting COVID-19 and becoming ill and not having that question answered. They don't even know if there's a will. So one of the silver linings about COVID-19 is that it has really amplified and brought urgency to estate planning, and I think really given that inertia for families to join today's webinar, to sit around the kitchen table and say, listen, these are crazy times and we need to get this stuff hashed out. Like, we need to sit down as a family and we need to work on this, because when someone dies without a will, that's called dying intestate. That formula that I referred to almost certainly is going to leave some family member aggrieved. Maybe a sibling off the farm is now put into business legally as an equal partner with their sibling on the farm. I mean, this is not a pretty show, right? We need to get at this. And I think COVID has just brought that urgency. It's brought that urgency. It also has brought to light this concern that younger farmers have about their parents getting ill and wanting to be able to go to the hospital and say, listen, my parents may be unconscious, but this is what they want. This is what they want in terms of, heroic efforts, right? So this is super important. These are great gifts that parents can give their children, that clarity around their health care, around the transition of major assets. Because when families are grieving in the fullness of time, when someone does die, when they're grieving the loss of a parent, that is the worst time to be dealing with money issues. Bad decisions come out of grief often when they're not pre-discussed. So again, today's webinar is really about, you use the word communication, starting the communication before the technical solutions, right? So before the lawyers, before the accountants, families need to get together and talk just conceptually about what they want to see. Then they can go to their lawyer and their accountant and say, this is where we want to go together as a family. That's when the lawyers and accountants can do really good work, because they're not guessing about what direction the family want to go. They know. Great question.
Yeah, no, agree. And I always say agriculture culture, right, is we can all look around our communities and see generational scars when that communication wasn't properly alluded to and assumptions were made. I think, again, as you stressed there in the COVID-19 response, what's been an interesting twist is it's the younger generation that needs to check in. Do I have a will now that I'm in the farming company, for example, things like that, and not just the classic, what's mom and dad's estate plan going to read? So yes, like you said, very interesting that it's been escalated and the inertia we needed. So this past week, I have read your book, the best-selling Willing Wisdom. So it is fresh in my mind. It was a great read, and I believe will resonate with Canadian farm families. So Dr. Dean, for the benefit of those hearing you for the first time, can you please explain why you believe family meetings, I'm seeing a trend here for communication, is so important for farming families?
Well, this is just speaks to my core, because this is what I grew up with. I'm 58 years old. I've been to 53 consecutive family meetings. I grew up at a really young age attending family meetings and listening to conversations about how wealth was being created, the challenges that we had running businesses, growing businesses, selling businesses, watching grandparents die, watching those conversations around how major assets moved through the generations. So, but in talking to a lot of other friends and colleagues, I just found that was really rare just a lot of people were being informed by an older, more traditional approach to estate planning, which was secrecy. Mm-hmm. Secret, keep everything secret, keep everything to yourself, and keep everyone guessing. And it just seems so very odd to me. And so Willing Wisdom was really meant to flip that and to really talk about the benefits that come when we actually open the process up and say to our family, look, we've been really successful, or we've been moderately successful. We've worked very hard to accumulate less wealth. We've spent less than we made, like we've been savers. We could have bought new everything, new homes, new cars, but no, we reinvested in the farming operation. We ran a very careful farming operation. Mm-hmm. All I'm saying is, why don't we take that same kind of discipline and invest in communication and family meetings to make sure that all that hard work and wealth transitions smoothly, so that families, surviving family members, really thrive and survive when we're not here. And I think that's what Willing Wisdom is. It's not just about how to write a wise will. It's actually how to leave something more valuable than a farm. How do we leave our wisdom? How do we leave our children working well together as a unit after we're gone? How do we make this family be our legacy, our greatest work of art? And I think when families approach estate planning from that perspective, they actually have super smooth farm transitions, because everyone's not guessing, oh, my sister on the farm's going to get all the money because I'm off the farm. I'm a dentist off the farm. She's going to get everything. Like we have a lot of brothers and sisters and brothers and brothers and sisters, every combination of siblings making assumptions about who's going to get what. Mm-hmm. And it could be the furthest thing from what mom and dad have in mind. So when mom and dad can get everyone to sit down and say, look, how is this thing going to move forward? What do you guys think? What do you want to do? And I just think those are great gifts. There's a lot of fear around that. But I think when families overcome that fear and conquer that fear, watch the family thrive. Watch things change. Watch relationships flourish. It's exciting work.
No, absolutely. And one of the kind of quotes I came up with for my families is, unspoken expectations are the silent killers of family farms, right? So exactly what you're saying too. So then if I look back on the word cloud there, time, right, was one of the biggest ones. How do we make time for this? But exactly as you said, if our goal is to have a viable, sustainable business to pass on, we're taking the time to meet with the crop input guys. We're taking the time to meet with our machinery guys. We need to make time for this, right? So I really liked how you said family there. That's the core of who we are. So absolutely. So will you and I discuss our next question? Another quick poll will pop up and we can all watch the answers as they come in. So the poll question is, who do you then invite to a family meeting? So Dr. Deans, can you please walk us through what a typical family meeting looks like in practical terms? Who on earth is invited? Because we know that can be a interesting conversation sometimes.
And who is uninvited after the first family meeting? Listen, there is no perfect family meeting. So let's just remove this idea of some perfect Norman Rockwell painting of this family that sits around a table and has this smooth, efficient meeting and everyone's just happy and singing off the same. Look, families are challenging, right? And every family is different. And every family meeting is different. So part of what I'm trying to say is I'm trying to take the pressure off. Like, take the pressure off yourself. I mean, really, the people that you can invite for your first family meeting would be, I would say, the immediate nuclear family. Just keep it simple, right? The less people, the easier the conversation. I would have an agenda. I would have a trusted advisor present. Often when you bring some business structure and governance, minute taking to those family meetings, it feels like a business, right? It feels like the business of family, not necessarily a family business, but the business of family. And I think when people see that advisor there, it takes a lot of emotion away. People kind of put their big boy and big girl pants on and behave. Like it's not emotional. It's really about tackling the big issues that often take families down, right? It's those families that learn when they're grieving and then they hire a lawyer, they lawyer up, and everyone's suing each other. Like, that's the worst thing. And that is as a result of the silence. Silence is the great destroyer of the Canadian family farms. It's not the families that talk about farm transitions, as difficult as those conversations are. It's the ones that just wrap it in silence or try to time, like they try to time their estate plan, right? Like that farmer, shortest will in Canada, who died under his tractor and he carved into the fender of the tractor. I leave everything to the wife. Like, that's pretty good timing, but not everyone is quite so lucky, right? We don't know when we're gonna die. So I think when we use death, instead of death using us, when we use death to bring urgency to these family conversations, that's just smart farming.
And so looking at the poll results, this is definitely what I see when I sit at the family table. So the two strongest ones are everyone, and then the second one is parents and siblings. So what I'm going to take as the difference there is the in-laws, the spouses, things like that. So can you allude a little bit to that?
Yeah, so as soon as you can expand, so after the first family meeting or maybe the second where the agenda is very short, and like that first agenda item could be mom and dad saying, listen, there's only one thing that we want to talk about in our family meeting today, and that's why we have our lawyer present. We'd like to figure out who should be our executor. So instead of us telling you who it's going to be, we thought we would have a family conversation about that. And maybe it's none of you kids. Maybe no one wants the job. Maybe we should hire a professional trustee, right? So as soon as that family meeting is over, I would say the second or the third one ought to include spouses, because running parallel to estate laws in every province is some version of the Family Law Act, which is going to give spouses entitlement, right, to those collective family assets. And if that is a concern, you have to wrap your mind around that and there are solutions. If you've got a daughter-in-law or a son-in-law who's got an addiction problem, has got a spending problem, those problems just don't vanish when you're dead. Those problems linger. They don't just magically go away. In fact, what happens is they actually compound, they get worse. So if those are real problems, financial advisors and lawyers have solutions. They're called trusts, and trusts can be put in place because sometimes people with addictions get healthy and those trusts can be amended, right? Or wills can be amended. So, but I think that disclosure, that involving those spouses as early as possible is really healthy for families, because if they're not invited, that's kind of like a statement, isn't it? It's a little bit of a statement about a lack of trust. Their inclusion, I mean, they're going to get some version of what happens anyways. You might as well have them a seat at the table. And I think that also builds trust and mutual respect inside family economic units. Great question.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think what I'm taking from today is even if they weren't invited, it doesn't mean there's not trust. They just didn't think through those next steps, right? And so again, it just all comes back to, we are having a family unit first. This is why, and then you'll be invited to the next, right? Really explaining through the thought process. So aside from your books, you also have an online assessment tool. Can you share more about the Willing Wisdom Index? It is a fascinating resource that can help our farming families begin building these smart estate plans.
Well, Annessa, it's a digital tool that takes 8 minutes. It's 8 minutes of your life that you'll never get back, but it is going to be worth every minute. After investing 8 minutes in checking, it's a checklist. It's basically a checklist that takes 8 minutes. And at the end of that checklist, you hit enter and you get a personalized 20-page to-do list, a report that shows all the gaps in your estate plan. So when you go to visit your lawyer, instead of that meeting being 3 hours at $400 an hour, right? It's maybe 45 minutes, because you've had family conversations based on the recommendations in your Willing Wisdom Index report. You make decisions about who your executor is, backup executor, power of attorney, backup power of attorney. You make major decisions. So when you go into the lawyer, it's a short, efficient, low-cost meeting.
Dr. Deans, I think what I keep hearing coming up again and again, and it's definitely what I know our FCC team is in full support of, is having a team, right? This is not a solo game. So working with your technical advisors, you don't know what you don't know, and really creating that smart estate plan with the experts. Alrighty. So I think we can move on to our question and answer session. So that concludes our formal interview part of today. But this is the part I am most excited for sure. Having you here today, Dr. Deans, to answer some of our audience's questions. So please put any questions in the question answer section on the right-hand side of the screen, and we will get to as many as we can today. But this first one that came in, I think it's a great question. So thank you for who asked it. You talk about bringing transparency to my estate plan, but what if I change my mind and want to change my will? That's the question.
I think that is such a powerful question, primarily because that's why a lot of people don't write wills, right? Because they think, if I write a will and I tip my hand and I tell someone they're going to get something, then something like a global pandemic comes along and that pushes my retirement out, but I've set these expectations, or I've changed my mind because some change in the relationship. My point is, even with family meetings, when we talk about what we want to do in our estate plan, things can change, and people always reserve the right to change their mind. But what I'm saying is, when they change their mind, disclose it. I mean, yes. manage it. There's a lot of people right now who are not saving for their retirement because they're making assumptions about what's coming their way, right? And then they get surprised. Or there's a lot of people who are being really parsimonious saving, and they're going to inherit a $30 million farm. And they're like they could have been maybe investing more in their business or in their children's education or in their health care. So there is a little bit of article of faith that when you make a disclosure, you always reserve that right to make a change. And that's very common. Most people do. Most people change their executors. Most people change their beneficiaries. And most people change the percentage that they leave to charities. There's a lot of people who get shocked. I'm talking about children who get shocked at how much money their parents leave to the local hospital. And they had no prior knowledge. And regrettably, one of the fastest growing areas of estate litigation, are you ready for this? It's children suing charities because they didn't know, or they're angry. They're angry at their parents. Yeah, it's not a great situation. We can avoid all this with family meetings.
Absolutely, that up front. And I really like that you added on. We've all heard of that in our communities, or seen that too, where it did not go as planned when the will was read at that point in time. The next question here, I think, is really great, tying into what we've discussed today. What should be discussed in our first meeting with our lawyer? For that first one, should everyone meet with a lawyer? So kind of tying into what we spoke to earlier.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think there are some real advantages when families share an advisor, because that advisor then has that big intergenerational 100-year view, right, of how money was created by maybe grandparents and how it will flow to the next generation, their kids, and then ultimately to the grandkids. One of the big challenges right now is people who skip over their own kids and leave the bulk of their estate to their grandchildren because they look at the lifestyle of their own kids and they figure that estate planning is really just about fulfilling a need. Like, their kids don't need the money, but the grandkids will. And that is really problematic. It is causing all sorts of friction, not between grandparents and grandkids. I mean, they're great allies, right? They have a common enemy. So, but one of the great things with family meetings, and I'm a speaking resource in family meetings all the time. I see little kids running around the boardroom. I see them running around the office or wherever, the hotel meeting room, wherever they're having the family meeting. And really what is taking place is a sequential generational flow. But the grandparents have a copy of their children's will, and they can see that money that goes to their children will ultimately flow to their grandparents. So there's that much disclosure, not just by the grandparents, but all the way through to the ultimate generations. Like, that's a really smooth generational transition. There's a lot of kids who turn 18, and because there hasn't been a lot of disclosure or planning, kids are turning 18 and getting access to trusts that have been set up by their grandparents, and they're becoming like fabulously wealthy at 18. I have 2 kids. That is not painting that is scary. That is scary when you have 18-year-old kids who then say, I don't need to go to university. I don't need to become an agrologist. I don't need to go and farm. I'm set. Mm-hmm. And so it can really undermine that relationship.
Yeah, and definitely all of that portrays the same, because we know in agriculture we're asset rich, cash poor, right? So it's the value of our land, it's the value of our quota, all of these factors. And so it's that same stress of how do we divide up something that isn't as loose as cash. And you're not inheriting a bucket of cash. We all know when you're a farm, it's a lot of risk and everything that goes with that. So absolutely a lot of parallels there for sure.
And of course,
this one, sorry.
And of course, Annessa, you know that if you don't have a will and you die, or if, say, a husband and wife perish together, our daughter's riding instructor and her husband were T-boned in an intersection. They both perished at the exact same moment. No will, so that when their daughter turned 18, she got the whole thing. Not a pretty picture. Too much, too soon, no planning.
Absolutely.
So that's what happens when we don't have wills.
100%. So this next question I think is really good. For sure. How to deal with a family member who refuses to participate in the family meetings?
You just keep inviting them. You just keep inviting them, and they keep uninviting themselves. They can see that I would send them the minutes from those meetings. They can still see that the family is going to continue on, the conversations are going to continue on, and they're taking themselves out of it. But what is really great about that is that when a parent ultimately does die, there's going to be a lot of disclosure. So what happens when there isn't family meetings is someone who gets less or is aggrieved and perceives to get less, they aren't angry with their parents. They project their dissonance and anger on their living brother or sister, who in many cases never asked for more, right? So one of the great gifts that we can give our favorite children is the transparency that they own their estate plan. They're responsible for the decisions if there is inequality, that it is not, right? It's not going to be projected on the living. So sometimes we do our children great disservices by keeping our estate plan secret, especially if there's going to be a little lack of equality. And then that, of course, gets to the issue is fair equal? Like, do we leave $1 million of value of farm to one child and $1 million of cash to the child off the farm? Is fair equal? I know one gets taxed and one doesn't. Sometimes this is where technical advice comes in, right? Sometimes we really have to understand what the after-tax implications are behind some of our ideas that we have for our will.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's certainly what keeps the senior generation up at night is how do I leave, even though it's a dollar value of land, for example, to the farming child when my off-farm assets obviously are not anywhere near that value to my off-farm children. But again, it's exactly as you said, it's not that cutthroat, because are we looking at productive value? Are we looking at fair market value? Is our family goal, so again, going to communication, to have a viable and sustainable business, right? Like a lot of conversations need to be had there, which ties into our next question for sure. So I know I talk a lot about this with my customers. Your thoughts on sweat equity? I hear this term thrown around a lot in the ag industry. How do you work that into an estate plan?
Oh boy, that is the $6 million question, isn't it, right? Who are the first unpaid employees on a farm? Right. And then when they muster a little bit of courage, they get maybe minimum wage. But you and I both know that everyone is keeping a mental tally of how much money they have left on the table by working long hours, late nights, kinds of things that non-family would never do. And then, of course, as farmers age, the next generation thinks that the ultimate solution, the reconciliation of that free or discounted labor will be a free farm at death. And many of these farms, as you know, are worth $3 million, $30 million, $300 million. These are enormous. Like, that's a pretty good hourly wage if you're getting a $30 million farm for free. But do you see what's happening? This happens all the time. Only in family businesses do we mix up employment income with ownership. right? We do it all the time. But people who are working for Coca-Cola or the federal government, they don't think they own Coca-Cola. They're trading their time for a wage. But on the family farm, it's all mixed up. It's all convoluted. People think that eventually, right, someone will do the math and write a check, or it just doesn't work out that way. And so there's a lot of resentment that's harbored. And it creates a lot of challenges between siblings as well. So my message is pay a fair wage, work hard, but pay a fair wage, and don't mix up ownership with equity. Don't mix that up with salary or hourly wage. They are two separate issues.
Yeah, definitely. And that's where the beauty, right, of having these conversations is you need to, for your family's estate planning, hear these different options and then cherry pick what works best for you. Because there's certainly operations we see where that disposable income just isn't there, right? So then it goes back to what you said, tracking, having that conversation and saying, we are tracking and then going to acknowledge that later. So I understand in our industry, it can be unique sometimes. I really like this question. I think it's very pertinent to today's conversation. Are there differences in transition between small farms and larger farms? Any thoughts for the smaller farms out there?
Well, with the larger farms, there are more zeros. They're bigger farms. It is shocking, the commonality of themes. The dynamics in family, whether it's 100 acres or 5 quarters, right? The commonalities in families, it's shocking. The commonalities across sectors, across countries. I've spoken to farmers in Central America, coffee growers. I might as well have been talking to corn growers in Ontario, or wheat farmers, or poultry farmers. We are family, right? The family value system is often incongruent with the value system of commerce. In commerce, it's a meritocracy, right? We hire the smartest, best, most productive, efficient, capable, competent person. Often in families, what we try to do is equality drives the family. We love treating family equally. Everyone getting the same size steak at the barbecue, right? That's what we do. And so those value systems are often in conflict on the farm. And then every farmer thinks that they're losing their mind. Like they've got these great businesses, but the family doesn't feel happy and whole, and they can't sort it out. They're trying to, and they never will. They never really will until they answer the question, how will my farm transition in a way that respects the values of the family and the values of business? It's a challenge, but you'll know from my first book that central idea is really all about the next generation. It's a tricky idea, but the next generation actually purchasing that family farm at full market value. And it's a hard concept. So a lot of young farmers are like right now going, oh my God, how am I going to do that? Like, I don't have the cash. But listen very carefully now. I'm all about families meeting. And if there is surplus money that will be transitioned to the next generation at death, why not start to transition some of that wealth now so that those kids can then use that money to buy those shares in the farm? It seems weird, but there's a lot of kids that are hanging around farms because they think that they're going to get them for free. When you ask the next generation to take a gift of money and then return it, instead of buying a new truck, to actually return it and buy shares, paper, in a business, that's a moment. That's a special moment for a farming operation. You'll find there's a lot of farmers that are going to find out that their kids like their jobs, but they don't like the idea of taking risk, not even risking family money. And so that's a big aha moment for a lot of family farms. You can do that with $10,000, $1,000, $100,000, or $1 million. You can start to make those living gifts to those kids and ask them, now, do you want to buy the family farm? And don't tell me you don't have any money, because I just gave you money. Watch the money, follow the money. It's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And again, just that classic, is our wealth tied into our assets and the stuff that comes from that? But that's why when we also talk about pre-transition, it's can we start to transfer land before death? Can we start to, how can we work with the resources that we have? Absolutely. So I'm just going to summarize a couple questions here because they have a general theme. Bringing in that new gen, prenups, how do we protect from divorce, family agreement. So I just kind of summed a couple up there, but I'll let you speak to that.
No, really, really awesome question. And I would say that, when families have meetings, often the first thing they tackle in the first 1 or 2 or 3 family meetings, usually when we've got, in-laws present, families actually really start to work on their mission statement. They really start to craft a vision statement, a mission statement, a family charter, whatever you want to call it. It's what are the guiding values that will shape this family for the next 100 years. Once that is in place, that can also include things like new people who join our family as partners must have a partnership agreement or a shareholder agreement or a prenup, right? So that often takes the pressure off that young person who's getting married to say, listen, it's not my idea, but this is kind of the way we have these family meetings. We have a charter. It's just the way we've done things forever. It's not just for me. All my brothers and sisters have to do it. It's not about you. It's not personal. This is just the business of our family is a family business that has governance and rules, and I don't make them up, but this is what I've signed on to as part of our family business, part of our culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, I think agriculture culture, we have such strong roots and we have such strong foundations, but we never write them down, right? So when you said writing a mission statement, I can just envision my uncle and my grandpa rolling their eyes. But if I was to sit down with a coffee, I could get a unified mission statement in 2 minutes, right? So just taking that time to write it down and have something to reflect back on.
Yeah, I think, if you look at farming, you don't have farmers who go, should I plant soy or corn? Soy or corn? Maybe just flip a coin. Like, no one does that. And we're talking now, but now we're talking about estate plan. We're talking about the success, the 100-year success of a farm. You're going to flip a coin? You're going to leave it to chance? Leave it to fate? Leave it to superstition? Leave it to the government to decide? Come on. Farmers are super smart, right? They're planners.
Absolutely.
They're good at finance. They're good at science. They're good at what they do. They're mechanics. They gotta be good at all. All I'm saying is just add one little more thing to that amazing skill set and answer the question: how can you help start a conversation around the smooth transition of your life's work? And the best part, when you do that, watch a farmer breathe for the first time. Answer that question: how to put a smooth, transparent plan in place. Watch them breathe and finally take a vacation. And finally, at age 80, get off the tractor and give yourself a pat on the back. I know you love farming, but you can still transition the ownership and still farm, right? Doesn't mean you have to get off the tractor. That's a choice, right? Ownership and working, remember, employment income and ownership, they're two separate issues. That doesn't just apply to the kids. That applies to mom and dad and the grandparents as well.
100%. So this one I think was building from the question earlier saying if someone refuses to come to the meeting, but this one we see a lot in our line of work. How can the next generation start the conversation when the senior generation refuses to discuss?
Oh my gosh, great question. First of all, anyone who's listening today, if they're over age 18, get a will. Even if you've got $1,000 to your name, it's your last $1,000. Seriously, you have to get these documents. You must. And as you get a little bit older, you can make changes to those wills, and it doesn't cost very much. It's called a codicil. It's really inexpensive to change a will. But now, when you're 18 or 19 or 20 or 25 and you've got a will and your parents won't talk about this subject, you can give them a copy of your will and say, listen, I go on planes. I drive a car. Nothing says that we die in order, right? We learned that lesson watching the Humboldt tragedy unfold on the prairies, didn't we? Right? That tragic moment was a reminder that bad things happen to great people. And so often when kids give their will to their parents, it's a moment. It's a special kind of aspirational moment where parents kind of go, this is weird that our children are parenting us. on the importance of estate planning. So many parents will reciprocate. Many parents will go, yeah, you know what? If they're old enough and mature enough to write their own will and share it with us, it's high time that we belly up to the bar and have a serious family conversation.
With that caveat that if we're being transparent now, it does not mean that we can't change our minds. Circumstances change, right? So
100%.
For sure. Okay, our next question here is, do you, when you're selecting a family member to be an executor, or you mentioned something about a professional trustee, can you explain a little bit further on that?
Yeah, so, I use the example of the first agenda item in the family meeting being the selection of an executor. And you'll remember that what I talked about, as opposed to mom and dad sitting at the head of the table in a formal family meeting with a tie on and everyone thinking someone's dying, because why would we sit and gather and talk about money? Someone must be dying. What I'm talking about is actually some of the best family meetings are at a cottage, on a dock, informal, serious, but a good, open, honest conversation. And so the example I used in the family meeting is someone saying, hey, your mother and I wanted to have a family meeting and just talk about who should be an executor. What do you guys think? So instead of just declaring, right, this is who we want, it's more of an open concept. And oftentimes the kids will all agree, it's like, you know what? We want to have a great relationship. We don't want the role of an executor to divide this family, because executors are sometimes, it differs by province, but entitled to between 3 and 6% of the value of the estate. Like, do the math on a $30 million, I keep using $30 million, I don't know why, but on a $10 million farm, right? That's a lot of money. So often kids' nose gets out of joint because mom and dad have selected the oldest boy to be, which is kind of a 1940s idea, oldest boy, even though he's a dentist in town, he's going to get the farm. He's going to be the executor. So I just think things have changed, times have changed. And I think when families open the conversation up and find the right solution and present the options, including a professional trustee who doesn't have a horse in the game, they're not emotional, they're administrative. This is a deeply administrative role. It is not fun. It is not sexy. It is detailed and it is hard. And whatever they do, no matter how organized and how fast and hard they work, no one can get their money fast enough. So it is a tough job.
Yeah, and that's definitely always interesting when I speak to my families too, is they tend to pick the off-farm child because they think they have the time. And it is that reminder of, so the farming decisions, there's no one representing potentially that perspective. So that's always when you see them sit back and go, oh, okay, for sure. So I think we have one more question. And again, we're just going to summarize quite a few that have come in. How do you encourage folks to share their intentions when planning the will? And I like that they wrote, and actually say what they want.
Yeah, I think, there's a lot of different approaches to dividing family assets. The one that I hear the most is Post-it notes. Families gather and they put stickies on the bottom of dishes. And I just think there's a better way. And I've watched it in 2 generations of my family prior to me. And that is in our family meeting. We have, and it's also in the Willing Wisdom Index, by the way, everything that I've talked about. So when people get their reports, they don't have to make notes right now. They'll see that in our family. Another really interesting approach is that when someone dies in our family, the beneficiaries, the first thing they get is cash. So in our family, like many families, we've got some high income earners and some moderate and low income earners that are going to benefit from the death of my parents, for example. And so what that first release of cash does is it puts people in a place where they can afford, you ready for this, to purchase things from the estate that are hard to divide. Hard to divide a bowl, a piece of ceramic, or a piece of jewelry. Really hard, right? Hard to divide a cottage, hard to divide a farm and a tractor and some implements. Really hard to take a pair of scissors to those. So by transitioning cash first, it then puts people in a position to actually buy the things that they really, really want. And then when the executor collects the cash from the sale of non-divisible assets, they then take that cash and divide it and give it out in exactly the same proportion as that first wave of money. It's brilliant. Everyone gets what they want.
Yeah, and I think, again, right, just to summarize, ties back in what do they want and having that open conversation. And what I find a lot is family members, off-farm children, they want a piece of the rock, right? Land, I keep saying land because that's obviously, I'm from Alberta, but it is who we are, right? And so if there's not a lot of that cash to distribute, it's saying, how can we leave some of the land to our off-farm child, rent it back to the business? Like, yeah, exactly. What do they want? So I really like that open transparency. Well, Dr. Deans, thank you so very much for taking the time to speak with us today. You are such a wealth of knowledge, and the diversity of clients you have worked with provides you with such a unique perspective. I hope you were all able to take away some pointers and tips and are now ready to act on creating or amending your family's smart estate plan. Take the next steps, regardless if you are the senior or the junior generation. As we discussed today, transition and estate plans are meant to be fluid. They are meant to change as you age and circumstances change, and therefore I encourage everyone to carve out some time to actually discuss with your significant others and your farming partners today's discussion and what really stood out for you. What were some of the key takeaways? If you have any questions about FCC's transition services, whether you are an FCC customer or not, please reach out to your local FCC office and they will put you in touch with one of us. We now have 8 FCC transition specialists spread out across the country. On behalf of FCC, thank you for joining us today, and we hope you have a wonderful summer. Goodbye and have a great day.